Howdy, it's Saturday morning, and you know what that means. It is time for, no, not your favorite true crime podcast. It's time for Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. And that means I'm here, your host, Connor Jones, and we're ready to talk about all things Wyoming and, your favorite topics. The outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking, and we'll get in a good laugh or two along the way. So, welcome to Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. Before we get started this morning, I've got a couple messages here from our sponsors. This week's episode is sponsored by Basins Market, located in Basin, Wyoming. Basins Market is your destination for groceries, fresh produce, and the best meat department in the Bighorn Basin. Come on in and sample their wide selection of products Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Out here in Poverty Flats, if your machine breaks down halfway to nowhere, you're in for a long walk home. That's why I've been using Lookover Power Sports, a handy little app that helps you track maintenance and set reminders, even with a photo right from the trail. It works for dirt bikes, side-by-sides, snowmobiles, and just about anything with a motor. You can try it free for a month, and it's 50% off until Labor Day. Start by visiting lookover.app, because breakdowns make bad stories, unless they're someone else's. We are also sponsored by the Wyoming Welcome Program. The Wyoming Welcome Program offers two services to local businesses: Table Talk and the Wyoming Welcome Baskets. Wyoming Welcome Baskets are filled with promotional items for local businesses and distributed to new move-ins to the Bighorn Basin. Table Talk brochures include jokes, facts about the state of Wyoming, the month's holidays, and advertisements from our local businesses. These brochures are placed on restaurant tables in Cody and Powell for diners to peruse. So if you'd like to get your business name out there, please contact the folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program by shooting an email to HaleyJ, that's HALEYJ, at wyomingwelcome.com. And now, the podcast. Just a note about one of those advertisements. I'm pretty excited about the new sponsor you probably noticed on the podcast, the Lookover Motorsports app. Just a shout out to the developer, my cousin Derek Hildreth. Thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast, and I've gotten on the app, and it was very intuitive, easy to use, and it's pretty neat. It saves all of the information about each of your vehicles. I already added my four-wheeler, and it's set to send me a reminder the next time it's due for an oil change. So get on there and give it a shot. You know, speaking of four-wheelers, been buzzing around a lot this week, and it got really cold, unseasonably cold on Wednesday, and we were up Shell Canyon doing a job for the Weed and Pest, and I have not been so cold and so soaked in a long time. The mist was so thick that even though it wasn't actively raining, if you got close to a pine tree, those needles were just taking the mist out of the air, and it was condensating so quickly. If you stood under a tree, it was almost its individual little rainstorm. It was amazing. But like I said, also very cold and very wet. I just got soaked to the bone. But we had a great time. We were buzzing around, taking care of noxious weeds, and doing what I like best, spending time in the mountains. So that is kind of a little example of a story that, I'll probably tell several times. And this podcast is full of stories. And that's why the title of this story is The One My Wife Has Never Heard. So, here goes. My first year working for the Forest Service, we hiked down to the base of Shelf Falls. We were down there looking up at the tourists, and they are waving to us. I bet there's only a handful of people who have been to the base of the falls. Those tourists were just looking down at us, and I said to Lewis, this other guy I was working with, "You already told me this one," my friend Mark Crawfry rudely interrupted. "What?" I asked, glancing over at Mark as I navigated a turn in the road. "You've already told me this one, Al. You tell me this story every time we drive past Shell Falls." "Nah," I said, eyebrows furrowed. "Are you sure?" "Yep," Mark replied with a sigh. "You're about to say, I said to Lewis, this other guy I was working with, I bet we could put a cutout of a mermaid down here and start an urban legend about the mermaids of Shell Falls." "Gee, I guess you're right," I muttered, crestfallen. I was about to tell Mark about the mermaid cutout and the urban legend we could start. Had it really come to this? Was I really starting to repeat stories? When you start repeating stories with your friends, you either need to get some new stories or get some new friends. Both can be expensive. Now, repeating stories isn't always a warning sign that something needs to change. For instance, when your wife informs you that you're retelling a story, there's no cause for concern. After about 5 years of marriage, your wife has heard all of your stories, and just about everything that comes out of your mouth is old news. You do have to be vigilant, though, because a good wife will start using the line, "You've already told me this one," for your new stories, too. For instance, when I came home from work the other day, I said, "You'll never guess what happened at work today." "Probably not," replied Lily, as she slid the drawer to the air fryer open. "So, we were hiking down this creek, and I saw a big bear track on the bank. I said to Rick, 'Man, if we keep seeing these bear tracks, you're going to need to—'" "I've already heard this one," Lily interrupted. I was truly flummoxed. "But this happened today at work," I spluttered. "How could you have heard this story already?" Lily shook her head and gave me a long-suffering look. "It's because every time you see a bear track, you say, 'If we keep seeing these bear tracks, you're going to have to start carrying a pistol, so if we ever come across the bear, you can shoot me in the leg and get a head start.'" "Oh," I said. "That's exactly what I said to him." "Yep, I know," Lily replied. "I guess after 7 years of marriage, you just get to know each other so well. You know each other's quirks and habits to the point where you can almost predict what your spouse is going to say in any situation. One time I was curious to find out if I really had exhausted all my stories with Lily, so I decided I would look for an opportunity when something truly unique happened and tell her about it, just to be sure I wasn't going crazy. The perfect opportunity came one weekend when I was hiking and fishing with Mark in the Bighorns near Lovell. We were coming back from a long day and had to cross the river to get to the truck. At the top of the river where we started fishing, the crossing was relatively easy since the river was low at that point. However, throughout the day, several creeks and streams continued feeding the river, and where we crossed at the bottom, its flow had nearly doubled. Now, this wouldn't have been a truly unique situation, since I've been fishing with Mark a number of times and crossed many rivers with him. There was, however, one thing that made the situation unique. I had my dog Chipper with me on his first fishing trip. This excursion was destined to provide just the unique situation I was looking for, and a story Lily had never heard before. The high water flow of the river provided just such an opportunity. At this point, when we needed to cross the river, Chipper wasn't so sure about crossing. He became even less confident after watching me wade slowly across, grimly gripping rocks with my toes and leaning into the current as the water swirled around my legs at mid-thigh. There was a pretty sketchy moment when the stick I was using to help brace myself slipped and I almost fell into the river. but I managed to recover my balance and press on. Once across, I turned back to Mark and Chipper. I don't know who looked less sure about the crossing. "Come on, Chipper," I called to the dog. He whined in response. "Come on," I said, louder this time. Chipper dipped his head and licked his lips, then whined some more, as if to say, "You try wading a river twice as deep as your height." "Chipper, come on, come here," I called, sure he could swim the river if he made a solid effort. Chipper wasn't buying it. Exasperated, I began thinking, which admittedly isn't my first instinct. That's when it dawned on me. I had some rope in my backpack, and slowly a plan formed in my mind. I coiled the rope in one hand and tied a figure-8 knot in the other. I swung the knotted end over my head like a team roper and yelled, "Here, Mark!" Then I let her fly with expert precision. On the third toss, I managed to get one end of the rope over to Mark. With one end of the rope firmly held in my right hand and the other end on Mark's side of the river with the dog, Mark quickly caught on. He bent down to tie the rope to Chipper's collar, but I immediately saw the problem with that approach. "Mark, make a loop around his waist and then tie it to the collar so he doesn't choke," I yelled. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, confused. "Here," I grunted, and demonstrated using my end of the rope, forming a loop and pulling the long end through it where it would be tied off on the dog's collar. Mark nodded and pulled the dog closer to him. Holding Chipper steady, Mark passed the rope around the border collie's waist and then tied it off to his collar. Chipper, who was starting to realize what the plan was, began whining and barked once as if to say, "You can't be serious." The rope now securely fastened to Chipper, it was time for this pooch to get wet. I gave the rope a tug, and Chipper dug in on the bank with all four paws. His eyes were wide, and he definitely looked like he was questioning my sanity. I could almost read his thoughts. Why did I have to get adopted by a madman? Giving the rope a hard pull, I dragged Chipper into the water. Once the current hit him, he resigned himself to the inevitable and dove forward into the river. This immediately put a little slack on the line and allowed the water to begin carrying him downstream. I started hauling in line in an effort to keep Chipper from being swept downriver. He narrowly missed a large boulder and came steadily closer to my bank. Taking in long arm lengths of rope, Chipper was soon near my side of the river, and as soon as his paws could touch bottom, he flew up onto the bank and did what any dog who's worth his salt will do after getting soaked. He gave his coat a good shake. "Chipper!" I spluttered, shielding my face from the sheet of water that flew off the drenched dog. When the shaking stopped, I bent over to untie the rope and gave Chipper a good scratch behind his ears. "Good boy," I crooned. "See, that wasn't so bad." Chipper rolled his eyes as if to say, "That's easy for you to say." Looking up at Mark, I could see he was almost as uncertain about the river crossing as the dog had been, and watching Chipper get swept downstream certainly hadn't increased his confidence. "Do you want the rope?" I hollered over the sound of the rushing water. Mark shook his head, his eyes focused on the swirling eddies in front of him. "Here," I shouted, and tossed the stick I had used to brace myself over to his side of the river. It clattered on the rocks, and Mark bent down to pick it up. Like a patient in a geriatric ward, he shuffled slowly into the frigid water. "Be sure to face the current and brace yourself on the rocks," I called out. "I know how to cross a river, Al," Mark hollered back without looking up, his eyes still firmly fixed on the water. The current swirled around his legs, the water now arriving at mid-thigh. As I watched, Mark's legs began shaking, and he leaned heavily on the stick I had tossed over to him. His knuckles were wide against the dark wood, and his jaw was set in a grimace. I could almost hear his muscles straining to maintain his balance over the sound of the rushing water. Then, for an agonizing moment, I thought he was going to fall backwards. "Mark!" I hollered, wading back into the river until the water lapped around my knees. I held up the rope, offering it to the struggling angler. "Stay back!" Mark bellowed. "I've got this!" When I pulled to a stop in front of the house, several hours later, darkness was falling. With an exhausted sigh, I pulled the key from the ignition and opened the truck door. I trudged around to the back of the vehicle and dropped the tailgate so Chipper could hop down. "Come on, Chip," I said warily, slinging my fishing vest over one shoulder and scooping up my fly rod case with the other. "Let's get to bed." The lights were on when I opened the front door, and Lily was sitting on the couch as I entered, a book on her lap. "Hey, dear," I groaned, sliding my hiking boots from my feet. "You sound like you had quite the day," Lily observed. "You could say that," I replied. Just then, I remembered why I had been so excited about the fishing trip in the first place. "Chipper did great today," I offered, hoping Lily would take the bait. "Good," she said, folding her arms. We had to cross the river a couple times, and on the first crossing the water was pretty low, so Chipper went right across. When we got to the second crossing, though, the water was a lot higher because of all the creeks that were running into it. Lily nodded, listening intently. At last I had a story she couldn't possibly have heard before. It was Chipper's first fishing trip, so this was at last a unique story. After 7 years of marriage, I could still surprise her with a new yarn. It was exhilarating, feeling like a true storyteller. Lily was hanging on to my every word. "I crossed first, and Chipper wasn't too keen on crossing," I continued. "He just barked and whined. So I reached into my bag and pulled out the rope I was carrying and tossed a loop over to Mark." "Oh, yeah?" Lily asked, her eyebrows raised. She was really eating this up. There she sat, anxiously awaiting the next part of the story. "Yep, and Mark just tied it off on Chipper's collar. But the current was fast enough, I knew he would probably choke or hurt his neck if I just hauled him across the river like that. So I showed Mark with my end of the rope how to pass a loop around Chipper's waist, like that old sheep herder lady showed us at the dog park, remember?" "Uh-huh," Lily said, scratching her nose to hide her excitement. "So we passed the loop around Chipper's waist, and I hauled him across, just like a big old fish. He wasn't too happy about it, but he ended up swimming most of it with a little help from the rope. Thank goodness I had that rope in my bag." "Mm-hmm," Lily nodded, glancing up at the clock on the wall. "That rope probably could have come in handy when Mark crossed," she said. "Well, I tried to offer it to him, but he wouldn't take it," I mused. "I know," Lily replied. "I've already heard this one." Suddenly, my story came to a screeching halt. One of my eyes began twitching of its own accord. "What do you mean you've already heard this one?" I spluttered. "This is the first time I've ever taken the dog fishing. This is a brand new story." I felt like a balloon somewhere in my chest had just been punctured with a rusty nail, and then someone stomped on it a few times for good measure. Lily picked at some lint on the sleeve of her robe and said carelessly, "Oh, Jane Crawfry called me from the emergency room. She told me the whole story." "But, how?" I croaked, words failing me. "You know," Lily said, "you should have called me to let me know you'd be getting home late. I was hoping you would be able to swing by the store and pick up some milk on your way." Regaining a fraction of my composure, I took a breath and said, "Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I should have called. I guess with all the excitement it slipped my mind. It's not every day I have to chase a friend downriver and pull him out from under a submerged log. I've got to hand it to Mark. He didn't even lose his grip on his fly rod." Lily heaved a sigh. I guess you would say he had his priorities straight, she said. Sure did, I said matter-of-factly, but still not fully recovered from the loss of my brand new story. Did Jane tell you how many stitches he got? I asked hopefully. 19, Lily replied. Gee, she really did tell you everything, I said. Mm-hmm, Lily nodded. Well, how was your day? I asked, sinking onto the couch. Candace and I went to Cody, Lily grinned. Nice, I nodded, leaning back into the cushion. We went to Walmart, then we checked out the clearance at Sierra Trading Post. You know they always have good deals on summer items this time of year. Uh-huh, I nodded, my eyelids starting to slide shut. I fought to stifle a yawn. I found a great jogging top, Lily continued. It's bright pink, and it'll go great with my... Hey, aren't you listening? Why are you acting so tired all of a sudden? I'm listening, I reassured her, jerking my eyelids up with all the effort of an angler landing a 10-pound salmon. Then, in a carefully hidden part of my brain, a quiet little voice said, It's just that I've already heard this one. But rather than saying it out loud, I just smiled and nodded along with Lily's story. Hey, she does it for me too. Well, there you have it. Another untold tale from this side of nowhere. If all goes according to plan, when this episode releases, I'll actually be fishing the river from this story with my dad. And I hope that the water level is not quite as high as it was at the time this story was written. So if you have a great story about crossing a river that your wife has already heard, then you can tell me about it, because I probably have not heard the story. So shoot me an email at untoldtalesthepodcast@gmail.com, or respond to this story when it drops on our Facebook page, and you may be featured on an upcoming episode of the podcast. As always, please be sure to give us a review, a 5-star rating on whatever platform you get your podcast from, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. So, this has been another untold tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much, and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.